Welcome to Beyond the Chutes is presented by ParaSight Systems. I'm your host, Doug Simcox, and I hope that you're having a great day, wherever you are, and with whatever you may be doing. I'm back home, back from Quebec, recording in Taylorsville, Kentucky. Today we have a very special guest. He is and has been a part of rodeo at the highest levels. First as a competitor, winning 11 steer wrestling world championships, and then moving into a leadership role as the general manager of the International Professional Rodeo Association. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Dale Yerigan to BTC. Dale, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks, Doug. It's good to be with you.
It is great to have you here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long, long time. So many topics we want to cover, right? So many. My goodness, I was at St. Tite. I know you were at St. Tite the week before I was up there. We'll talk about that. What a great show. Want to talk a little bit about the IPRA, growth and innovation and everything that has happened historically there. New ownership announced in January of this year. We'll talk about that. And then I'm excited about the new technologies they're bringing in. But before we get there, I want to start at the beginning. Let's start with where you grew up. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you grew up in Minnesota.
That's correct. Most of the time, and little town of Isanti, Minnesota, which some people in rodeo recognize because they do have a rodeo there, and it was a IPRA sanctioned rodeo for a long time. It is currently a PRCA sanctioned rodeo, so I'm not involved there anymore. But it's a little town about an hour's drive north of downtown Minneapolis, and most of my family still lives there, and I was the only one that ran away from home and joined the circus. I moved to Oklahoma when I was about 20 years old to pursue a rodeo career, and I've lived in Oklahoma ever since.
Oh, excellent. And how did you find rodeo in Isanti, Minnesota? Was the rodeo already going on there in Isanti?
Well, it started when I was probably early teens, but I got started through high school rodeo. Okay. I was involved with 4-H when I was a kid, and had a horse project with 4-H. Went to the county fair and some of those things, and then some friends got involved in high school rodeo. Some of them were a little bit older than me, and then got me started. And there was a couple of guys that from Isanti, Tom and John Bartz, that were construction workers during the week, but rodeoed a lot. Had some success on the regional level, and as well as Tom qualified for the IFYR a few times, and so they lived not far from me. Families were mutual friends, and they were 8 or 10 years older than me, so they had a lot more experience than me, but they really helped me a lot and really helped me get started. And so I started competing with them at high school rodeo first, and then when I graduated from high school, I practiced with them and traveled with them. And then when I guess I thought I was good enough, and I got an offer from Red Duffin, who lives in Ada, Oklahoma, and he was a 5-time IPRA world champion steer wrestler, and he invited me to come and stay with him and travel with him, and so I packed up one spring and moved to Ada, Oklahoma, and started to travel with him.
At 20 years of age, you made that move.
Yeah, and I'm sure my parents thought I was crazy and all of that, and we laugh about it now. It's a lot of time passed. Fortunately, my parents are both still alive and in their about 87 years old, and okay. So we look back now, and that's been 40 years since I packed up and moved off, and I don't know if they thought, well, he'll get this out of his system this summer and be back, or what, but here I am, and it all worked out, I guess, the way it was supposed to.
Absolutely. And what events, Dale, did you work in high school rodeo? What events?
Yeah, so I was team roper and tie down roper in high school. I actually didn't start steer wrestling right at the end of high school, and then as soon as I graduated from high school, I got more serious about it, and I guess it came to me more naturally. I started having success sooner And I guess I really gravitated toward the steer wrestling, and would rope occasionally after I got out of high school, but not very often. And I might team rope somewhere with somebody in the practice pen, and have entered a handful of rodeos over the years, but really focused on the steer wrestling after that, and really got involved with that event. So
okay, and rodeo schools or anything as you came up?
I didn't go to anybody's rodeo school other than, as I said, Tom and John Bart's. They were competitive for being, what people would call regional cowboys. They were very competitive, and so I had the benefit of living, half a mile away. Our properties, my parents' property and their parents' property, bordered on the back side. And so even when I started working after high school, I could get home from work and saddle my horse and ride across the pasture and through the back way. We had a path through there, and ride over to the practice pen. And my horse was warmed up when I got there, and we practiced a lot, and they were a huge help to me. And having, that kind of knowledge and experience right in my backyard almost, it was, so I never actually went to anybody else's school. Then when I moved to Oklahoma, just being around the guys and practicing with the guys I was traveling with, because there was Red Duffin, who was a 5-time world champion. There was Clarence LeBlanc, that was not then, he was a 1-time world champion at that point, but had won another one after that, and Mike Sanders, who was a multi-time IFR qualifier, later went to the NFR several times. Dan Daly was traveling with us. That's the kind of guys I was traveling with and practicing with, and so every day in the practice pen was a school in itself, and as well as in the truck and the conversation, and going over our runs after we were done and learning from those guys. I benefited from that greatly without having to, go to somebody else's school.
Yeah. And to have that mentorship, to have that influence, whether it be, Red Duffin, as you said, or Clarence or Mike or Dan, the ability to look back and talk a little bit about the rodeo mindset. You had to pick it up from these guys. How would you define the rodeo competitive mindset, Dale?
Well, the analogy is used in other sports that you have to have a short memory. It's almost like a baseball pitcher. You throw a pitch that somebody hits for a home run. You gotta block that out and get right on to the next one. And it's a lot that way in rodeo. From those guys that I learned from, and then develop, my own style or strategy, whatever it would be. I think that I certainly, reviewed the run that I made and critiqued it and tried to learn from the mistakes. But then you got to put it behind you, because there's another rodeo, there's another steer to run, and if you need to learn from it. But if you dwell on it too much and are too hard on yourself, and you're still thinking about the mistake that you made when you run the next one, I think you're more likely to repeat it. And so, I always tried to learn from it and move on. I'm not I think people would say that have been around me a lot, I'm not a real emotional person as far as the highs and lows. Try to keep it pretty even keeled. I've seen other people and experienced both, where people are, when they win, they're just on the top of the world, and they're jumping around and celebrating, and that's fine if that's what works for them. But then, they're usually, when they don't win or make a mistake, they're so hard on themselves that they almost get down. And there's a lot of peaks and valleys in rodeo, and you can go on a cold streak and not draw the right steers, or not make very good runs, and not win for several rodeos in a row. And if you're just really emotional about it and beating yourself up, you're probably not in a good state of mind when you do get the next opportunity. And so I tried to always keep things pretty even keeled. The high's not too high and the low's not too low, and I guess it worked out okay.
Boy, I'll say 11 world championships. And what of those rodeo lessons, Dale, have you carried with you into the rest of your life, whether it's family or business or relationships or whatever?
Well, just the things that I was talking about with the, high's not too high and the low's not too low. I think that goes along with most things in my life. I've been very fortunate family wise. As I mentioned, my parents are both still alive and have a brother and two sisters. We all have good relationships and I have a wife, Kathy, I've been married for it'll be 35 years this fall in November, and she grew up in a rodeo family. Her father was Bob Inc., who was the president of the IPRA back in the 70s and an IFYR qualifier and judged and picked up in lots of different things. And her mom, Barb, was a IFYR qualifier in the barrel racing, and so we met through rodeo, and we have one son, Garrett, that just turned 29 the other day, and he's a rodeo announcer and has been the announcer of the year the last 2 years in the PRCA. But before that, he announced in the IPRA and was announcer of the year in the IPRA, and as well as announced the IFR 5 times, and so rodeo has been a big part of our family, but all of it with business or anything, there's going to be those highs and lows. I mean, I have calls from people now on the business side of things, when something doesn't go their way or they feel like something didn't go right at a rodeo or the judge made a bad call or whatever it is. I understand that they're upset and some of them, are so emotional. They just like it's the end of the world. Like, the sun is not going to come up tomorrow because this guy made a bad call, or I got a late flag, or, I wasn't enough points, or whatever it might be. And it's probably going to work out. Maybe you did, not win as much as you were supposed to win today, but maybe last week you got a good call, or next week you'll get a little bit of an early flag. It has a tendency to kind of work out in rodeo. Some people call it, cowboy justice. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but it does seem to kind of work out. But if you're really focused on the negative and dwelling on it, now that doesn't mean that somebody shouldn't call and inform us that there's a judge that's making mistakes or that something went wrong. I'm not suggesting at all that we ignore any problems or complaints, but just try to address it in a calm manner, and because if you're just so emotional that you're just putting all of your eggs in that basket, that one call cost you going to the finals or whatever it might be. I think the ebb and flow of rodeo has a way of working out over the long term, over a whole year or season. So, but I've tried to apply that to most things in life. And I was in the dentist office earlier this year and had a tooth that had some problems. And he said, "Do you grit your teeth a lot?" And I said, "Well, I hope not a lot, but sometimes I do, but it keeps me from saying things that I shouldn't." And I was joking, but sometimes you have to listen to somebody vent and get, blow off a little steam and get something off their chest, and then analyze it and see what really happened and try to deal with the best way that you can and not get caught up in the emotions of it. You bet. And you competed at over 100 rodeos a year, so you had to have seen a lot of different situations you got into, whether it was mud or snow or good steers or bad steers. You just went with it, right? Well, yeah, and you have to, or the only way you're going to be successful, and you're not always going to have the good one, and sometimes the conditions and stuff. I was, I think, if I would look back, pretty successful in the mud, for instance.
Were
because
you? Okay.
some people when we got somewhere, and you don't control Mother Nature, and a lot of rodeos are outdoors, and so you're gonna deal with mud and weather conditions, and rain and cold and hot and all those things. Well, I think some people were thinking, oh, the conditions are terrible, and the mud's deep, and this and that, and well, I didn't prefer to compete in the mud. I like the nice, dry, perfect conditions like everybody. But some people are almost defeated a little bit just because of the conditions. And if you go out there and give it your best effort every time, you're certainly going to beat those ones that aren't giving it their best effort. And so, if in those muddy conditions, I never worried about if I was going to get muddy or if it was more dangerous or whatever it was. So if anything, I felt like I had an advantage because I was still going to go at it and try to win something. And that I think some of them maybe didn't have winning on their mind. They had, boy, it's nasty out there on their mind.
Yeah. And that's a great point and a great example of perspective. Backing in the box, not wanting to be there because of the mud, and you turn it, you flip it and go, no, I think there's an advantage here. I think I can pull this off. And you said you're pretty good in the mud, but man, that attitude, when you back in, you still go for the win.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing about competition. I'm sure, rodeo's the thing that I'm the most familiar with because I did it for the longest time. I didn't compete in other professional sports, but it is so much mental, and sometimes you have to just use whatever you have. I've seen people that if they have a steer that they don't think is very good because his track record is bad, they're probably not going to win, one, because maybe the steer isn't very good, but also because they've got a bad attitude and they're defeated before they nod their head. I think you got to go at it. And I placed on some steers that maybe didn't have a very good track record because I still gave it the effort. And maybe that steer had a bad day and I had a good day, but maybe the steer wasn't as bad as what the record showed, and the right person hadn't run him yet. I think if you and ride a good horse, and in my event was key to have a horse that would let you win in different situations.
Sure. And what year, we're going to talk about the horses here in a minute. What year did you jump with Red and in the truck? You were 20 years of age. What year did you do that, Dale?
That was in 1984, and I turned 21 that year, but my birthday's in June, I had moved down there before that, so I was still 20 in the beginning of 84.
So you said going hard, no other job, Dale. You're 100% on the road. Yeah,
and now I've done other things along the way. In the 25 years or so that I spent competing, and that being my primary focus and livelihood, there's ups and downs, and sometimes I'd get short on money, and I grew up around the construction business, and so I could do some things, and so sometimes I'd go build pole barns for a few days when I was home, or different things, help somebody build a house, whatever it took to keep going, and then having horses and hauling my own and making mount money and stuff was a good supplement to what I could win also.
Yeah. So in 1985, they mounted you up. Red put you on good horses, and you started with good quality stock.
Yeah, and I starting in Minnesota, Tom and John Bartz that helped me get started, they had good horses as well, and I had bought a horse, Jack Wiseman, who's another legendary figure in IPRA history, came to my little hometown rodeo at Isanti, Minnesota, before I'd moved to Oklahoma, and he had brought a horse that belonged to somebody else up there for somebody to look at to buy, and that guy wasn't interested anymore. I don't know what happened there. And so Jack mentioned it to, I think it was John Bartz, that, he had this horse, and I'd been practicing on their horses and stuff and riding their horses. And so they told me about him. I tried him there after the rodeo and bought the horse. And he was a pretty good horse, and I learned a lot riding him. And then, but when I moved to Reds, then he had a horse called Reverend that was a horse of the year, and was a really good high level horse. And Clarence and Mike and Dan and all those guys, and Red himself and others had been winning on him, and he was a proven winner. And so it was a good situation to just get in there, have a good horse, experienced hazer with Red, and Mike Sanders also, hazed a lot of the time in that rig, and he was really good. And so, it was one less thing to worry about. I knew when I got to the rodeo, I had a good horse under me, and I had a good hazer beside me, and I always felt like I had a chance to win. But, a 20-year-old kid, I'm sure I thought I knew everything about how the world went around, but it was a learning experience for me, for sure. And to have those guys to mentor and learn from was a big advantage.
You bet. And did Red have a hazing horse as well? So he hauled a team?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. So we had all that ready to go. And I took my horse with me when I moved down there, and he let me keep my horse there and stuff. And so I would usually just practice on him. Once in a while, I'd take him to a jackpot and ride him if Red was going to leave his good horse off, and not take to a small jackpot or something. I would take my own, but I ran a lot of practice steers on the horse that I had when I moved down there.
Yeah. So in 1984, you're riding Red's horse, Reverend. A year later, you win your first championship in the IPRA as a steer wrestler, 1985.
Yeah, I qualified for the IFYR that first year in 84 for the first time, and then came back in 85, and Clarence LeBlanc that was traveling with us lived at Okmulgee, Oklahoma, and Clarence was going to build a house, and he knew what it was like as a young guy trying to make it rodeo and stuff, and he invited me to come and stay with him if I would help him build his house. He was building it on the same place where he lived with his family, and so he would help me with entry fees and stuff. But, he didn't have a lot of money to pay me either, but he'd make sure I got to the rodeos and entry fees paid and stuff. So I moved up there and lived up there at his place, and bought a little trailer house and parked out back, and helped him build his house. And then that spring, Clarence ended up buying a really good horse, Palomino horse called Fox, that so then he kind of put his own rig together, and I got in and rodeoed with him, and then that's the horse that I rode the most of that year, and then rode at the IFR that next January and won my first championship on.
Okay, so you jumped into another rig. Who else was hauling with you and Clarence in 1985?
So Mike Sanders also, went with us. It was me and Clarence and Mike, and Dan got in with us for a while, and Clarence's brother Kenneth, who qualified for the IFR multiple times and was a really good hazer, and he went with us. And there were those first couple of years. Then I got out of Clarence a year or so later. Then Clarence decided he wanted to stay around closer to home. So he told those of us that were traveling with him, and so that's when I bought another horse and put my own rig together and started hauling my own. And some of the guys that were going with Clarence then got in with me because he was going to stay home and stay closer to home for a little bit. But again, it was a group of winners that, there's so many cliches used, iron sharpens iron, and you're only as good as the company you keep, and all those things, but there's a lot of truth to them. And I think that you do learn from the people around you, even if you're not, they're not really telling you what to do. They lead by example, and you see what they do and see what they do to be successful, and you absorb that and learn from it. And I think that all that adds up. And if it's there, if you want to learn it, they're there. And just the natural progression. Usually the guys that just want to whine and bellyache and not really put out the effort, it's just kind of a natural succession that they usually go away, and the winners keep going, and the guys with the good attitude and that are willing to put into it, what it takes, they usually survive and stay around the longest. So.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah. And one of the biggest questions I get from our listeners, Dale, is about the road. They want to know about the road. And you're doing 100 rodeos a year at this time. About how many miles a year are you putting on your rig?
Oh, like usually over 100,000 miles a year.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it's a lot of wear and tear on equipment and yourself and all of that. But, and the traveling groups, until somebody does it, it's really hard to describe, or as it is for me, but it really becomes kind of its own little family, because you're kind of spending more time with them than maybe you are your real family. Yeah. And like all families, there's a little dysfunction along the way, or somebody doesn't like somebody as well, or they have a disagreement or whatever. But most of the time, and there's things that are funny that happen, that even if you didn't think it was funny at the time, I look back now, it's just, but the camaraderie and we're all in it for the same purpose, right? And we're helping each other get down the road, and everybody's helping with expenses and all of those things, because for one guy to load up and go to 100 rodeos and drive 100,000 miles, it's not realistic. One, the cost of it, it would eat you up. And then also, just if you had to do all that driving yourself, where, we shared all that, one bunch would be in the camper sleeping while the other bunch was driving. And then, when that group was tired, we'd switch places and rotate, and away we'd go again. And we could drive all night, all day, and, just in rotations like that, and cover a lot of territory.
And you were able to get everybody up most generally into the same performance and that sort of thing to keep the truck together?
Yeah, and most of the rodeos had slack after the performances. There's some exceptions where they had a morning slack or something, but a lot of the time the slack was after the performance. So, if we some of us might be up during the rodeo and some after, but we could usually get entered how we needed to. And now when we start out the week, we might say we want to go to A, B, and C, and when we tried to enter, it didn't work out that way. So we end up going to C, B, and A, or and go backwards and start on the other end of things, or and also, especially back then, a lot of the rodeos down here in Oklahoma in this area would start on Wednesday or Thursday night. Wow. And end on Saturday night, because they didn't traditionally back then have rodeos on Sunday, and in the South, what everybody called the Bible Belt. And so a lot of times we would start and go to a couple rodeos kind of down this way, and then we'd work our way north and go to a rodeo in Indiana or Illinois or Michigan, and might end up in Pennsylvania or New York, or you never know, and just however it worked out. But because they had more Sunday rodeos up there, so usually we'd start south and work our way north, and then come back, and the next week do it all again and make a big circle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you did the logistics and the planning, did you have one person in the truck that did all the entries, keep everybody together?
Well, and so things have really changed as far as how you enter rodeos in the modern day. So back then, the individual secretaries were taking the entries on one phone line, and so it was and it was a real rat race to try to get entered at the rodeo. So one of the things that made us successful, both when I traveled with Red or Clarence and then had my own rig, was we would either, everybody, if we were home, give everybody a list, and we'd all be calling to get entered. So we may have, plus, wives, girlfriends, friends, mom, dad, whoever we could get to call, we might have 10 or more people calling with our list trying to get us entered. And so, or if we were on the road, we'd stop at a truck stop that had, and now everybody's got a cell phone. You can't hardly find a pay phone. But back then, there'd be a whole long bank of pay phones in a truck stop.
Yeah.
And we would stop when it was time to enter, and we would get, 6 or 8 or 10 of us, however many were in the rig.
Okay.
On a bank of payphones, and we'd be dialing as fast as we could, and busy signal, and hang up, and then we'd finally get through and go through our list, and it was quite an operation. Now if people get a busy signal, they're in a panic. It was those kinds of things have changed a lot in rodeo with central entry systems and online entries, and now we use a system that has an app you download from the App Store and you can enter through it. That part of it's a lot different. But back then it was. When I moved to Red's house, this is really going to tell my age, but he got a push button phone and recently, and that was a big deal because the rotary dial, you could wear a blister on your finger with the rotary dial phone, enter rodeos, and then got one with redial on it. Well, man, I mean, that was like a high tech deal to have a phone with redial.
That's interesting. Yeah. And we're going to talk technology in a future conversation because, man, you guys are getting it on down there. Now, one thing I want to point out to our truck or to our listeners, you're hauling with 6 or 8 or 10 cowboys, and you got a truck full of winners. So basically, if you want to make any money, you got to beat your truck. Is that a fair statement?
For sure, and I think that, and we weren't the only ones. That was common then for more guys to travel together and stuff. Now I kind of partly jokingly say, they want to go 2 guys in a 40-foot rig and pull in there, and and there's not even room in the parking lot for everybody anymore. But back then, it was mostly timed event guys were mostly traveling in a camper and a bumper pull trailer, not a big living quarters trailer. And a lot of the rough stock guys had either a pickup and a shell camper or a van. Vans were common for rough stock guys to travel in then. And you'd pile everybody in there. We'd put in $20 a piece for gas, and we're liable to make it a long ways on $20 a piece. Of course, gas prices were a lot cheaper, and then we might have to put 5 or 10 more a piece in to get back home. But it was a lot different then, and a lot more affordable, with fuel prices and everything. But yeah, we would when we pulled in a rodeo, when we had that kind of a group, I felt like if I was winning something when we left, I had a good chance to win something, because just by beating the guys in my truck, I felt like I was probably going to fare pretty well in the overall, because all those champions and IFR qualifiers that we traveled with, and I think it made the competition tough. No matter who else was entered, just with our truck being there, it made the competition pretty high level.
Yeah, and you talked rodeo mindset. Were you able to not think about beating my competitors and shifting, as you talked about, running in the mud and that sort of thing, to make the best of what you got, to do as good as you can on that steer? Was that the mindset when you backed into the box?
Sure, because in our traveling group, we all talked about steers, and even the guys that weren't in our truck, steer wrestlers are famous for this, that we all help each other, and it's kind of a bit of a brotherhood, and there's people riding other people's horses more than there is in other events and stuff, but we would share knowledge about steers. I learned to get pretty good at it, but when I first ventured off and really started to rodeo hard, I wasn't the best at remembering, steer numbers and herds and stuff. But as the summer went on and we went to some of the same stock contractors rodeos, and they'd run the same pen of steers, most of the year, we got familiar with them. So, we would look at the draw and say, I've got 57, and Clarence would say, yeah, I had him over there 2 weeks ago at such and such, those kinds of conversations. And well, you still have to back in there and run them and not get too much pre-planning. I mean, you can overthink it, but it helps to know that steer's a little slower. I need to let him start a little more, or he really runs hard, or he checks off when you get there, so you can be ready for those things. But it really is a lot of, it's good to share information that way and learn from the others. And then as I moved along in my career, I got pretty good at remembering them. And when I was hauling horses, guys would kind of depend on me. When they came to ride my horse, they'd say, they tell me what steer they've got. Do you know anything about him? Well, not only I would want to give them that information anyway, but if they were riding my horse, I wanted them to have the best opportunity to win, because I stood to get a percentage of what they won. And so that was, and besides just the cowboy way of doing things and being honest with somebody and telling them what you know about a steer.
Sure. Did you keep a written record? Did any of the cowboys you traveled with keep a book?
Yeah, so some did. I didn't usually, keep a book on them. A lot of my career I spent really busy on the hazing side as well, and hazing for lots of contestants. So I wasn't sitting on the sideline and able to keep a notebook, but some did, and sometimes somebody in our truck would keep a list and stuff for the future, and especially early in the year until we kind of got to know the steers and stuff. But I developed a pretty good memory. I guess survival skills. It was an advantage to have a good memory and remember cattle and be able to remember those things. And so I got pretty good at that.
Okay. And when you mounted them up on your dogging horse, you also had a hazing horse you were hauling? You had a team?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And did you typically, unless you're competing, were you the hazer helping that cowboy?
Yeah, I hazed a lot of steers, and then I would usually have somebody in the truck that would haze for me. Every once in a while, they would haze for some other guys too, if we were back to back on a horse or something like that. But most of the time, I would do all the hazing except for when I competed.
Okay. And we've talked with a lot of doggers, but I've never talked with somebody about the skills needed to be a good, successful hazer. What are those skills, Dale?
Well, you really need to be able to read cattle from the standpoint, because now if you've got a really good seasoned hazing horse, it makes it much easier, and they'll do a lot of it themselves. I mean, they'll break from the box hard and rate off when they get to the steer like they need to and stuff. But there's to me, if you can kind of be watching the what position the steer wrestler is in, because if his horse is a little wide, you need to be in position to move the steer over closer, or if his horse is coming in real close, the quicker you can judge that, and you can move over and give him a little more room, things like that. Some steers, especially as the season goes on and the steers get more runs on them, some of them will start to check off or let off when you get to them. And while that can be a big advantage, because you can get your feet on the ground faster if one will let off, if you jump out there too quick and shut the steer off before that guy's ready and the steer stops and he doesn't get a chance to catch him, or he's all strung out and out of position, then you've hurt his chances. So being able to be, that's one of the reasons why I really like to have a hazing horse that could really run, sometimes even faster than the steer wrestling horse, because I could hold up a little bit and kind of read the play, and see the position of the contestant. And then when they're in there ready to catch and in good position, you can run up there a little further and get the steer to pick his head up and let off and lose some of that forward momentum and help the contestant, but but it's a real art to it, and takes lots of repetition and practice, and and it's not necessarily that somebody has to have been a steer wrestler to haze, but I think it's most of the time it's an advantage because they've experienced, they know what it's like on the other side, and it usually helps them to read those cattle and adjust to a situation that they personally have experienced, and kind of know what you need and what you don't need, because some hazers are too aggressive. There's too much contact. They're always bumping steers and stuff when you don't need it. And that's not always a good thing. So it's a happy medium there to be in position to help when you're needed, but not overdo it and kind of be too much help and get in the way.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for that. That I think our listeners will enjoy hearing about the skills. And to be fair, when you won your championships at the IFR, we'll get into a few more here in just a minute, you were still hazing at that point as well as competing as a dogger?
Yeah, most of the years, like the first couple championships I won, the first one for sure, I don't think I don't know if I hazed for anybody else that year, but as things went along, I hazed a lot of steers. There was one year in Oklahoma City at the fairgrounds that I think I had two steer wrestling horses, and I had like 6 or 7 guys ride one horse, and
wow.
2 ride another horse, and then I hazed for 2 more guys. I mean, I'd haze 10, 12 steers a night out of 15. I mean, I hazed most of the steers, plus competed myself, and so it was nonstop. I just boom, 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 and jump from one horse to another, and it made things go really fast and really busy, but I think that was a combination of, especially the guys that weren't riding my horse that asked me to haze for them. They could have got anybody to haze, but it made me feel good that they felt like I was, gave them their best opportunity to win.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with hazing or competing 12 out of 15 runs, did the hazing help warm you up, get into that mindset? Was there some advantage there, Dale?
Well, I got really used to it. One guy that I spent some time around, and I've seen this affect people differently. So Roy Duval, that I was fortunate to spend some time around in my career, and get to know a little bit. He was the best at, or one of the best guys I was ever around about attitude and being a winner. Like, he didn't. I've seen guys that are winning and having success, and then they get their own horses and they're hazing and doing all the other things and taking care of their horse and their rig and everything, and it almost takes away from their steer wrestling because they're worried about all this other stuff. Or if you haze a steer and you make a mistake, I felt terrible if I made a mistake and messed up hazing for somebody. I mean, I don't want to sound like it didn't bother me, but then you have to, again, the short memory thing, you have to forget about that, because then when it's your turn and you get on the horse, you have to know that you did the best you could. You made a mistake, but it wasn't lack of effort. You tried your best, and then block that out and focus on running your steer and competing the best you could on that steer. Because if you're still thinking, when you back in the box, if you're thinking about, oh man, I can't believe I just messed up for, might be your best friend that you just made a mistake on, you can't think about that. You've got to move on and really 100% focus on winning, and every time you back in there, good steer, bad steer, whatever, you've got to go with the mindset that you're there to win. And that's some of the things, again, I learned from guys like, Red and Clarence and even Jack. Jack and I never did travel a lot together, but I was around Jack a lot, and he had a great attitude, and he was a winner, and he every time he backed in there, he was going to try to win something. It didn't matter if what had happened before or after that, and Roy Duval was a great example of that he he was a winner, and he was going to block all that out when he backed in there for his turn.
Yeah. More rodeo life lessons is what I'm hearing. I love it. You did the best you could, right? Things happen.
Yeah.
But if you know you've done the best you can, then shifting and letting that pass go. And I love that. Absolutely love that. And how to move forward and how to get refocused and time to go. Time to go.
Yep.
Here we are.
Yeah.
So did you started your own rig in 1986, hauling a team. Did you maintain your rig then through the rest of your career?
Most of the time, a couple of breaks in between. And so in the late 80s and in 86, there was a lot of people aren't aware of this or know about it or have forgotten about it. But prior to that, there was rules in the PRCA that you couldn't be a member. You couldn't compete anywhere except for PRCA rodeos if you're a PRCA member, and they would fine you or suspend you if they found out that you went to an unsanctioned, non-sanctioned rodeo or had a membership but somewhere else. And then consequently, the IPRA had a similar rule that you couldn't be a member of an organization that wouldn't allow our members to be members.
I see.
And so there was separation before that, and so the PRCA got sued on a right to work issue and lost the lawsuit, and so that sort of opened it up where everybody could go everywhere. And so me, like a bunch of other people, bought a PRCA permit and filled my permit in I guess that would have been 86, end of 86 or somewhere along there. Then 87. I went, or maybe it was 87 when I got a permit. Anyway, I went to some of them and filled my permit and stuff. And then 88 and 89, I went to a lot of PRCA rodeos. But in the spring of 88, I had no, it was spring of 87. My years are getting away from me. Spring of 87, I had a wreck. Myself and Mark Owen, who was a good friend and traveling partner, and Red Duffin. It was just the three of us, and we went to Hampton, Virginia, to a rodeo, and we were coming back home, and we were over around not far from Nashville, Tennessee, on Interstate 40 over there, and in the middle of the night, and ran off the road in the center median. Mark was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and Red was actually in the camper, and so we went off in the median and rolled the truck and trailer multiple times, and so it was my truck and trailer, and so we totaled it, and everybody survived, thankfully. No severe injuries there. Both horses survived. Oh, wow. And then the hazing horse that was an older horse anyway that I had at the time, he didn't seem to be hurt bad at all. He had some cuts and scrapes, but nothing major. And about a month later, I gave them both some time off, and about a month later, he died, and I didn't have an autopsy done, but they think he had a heart attack or a blood clot or something like that, because there was no sign of distress. I found him dead one morning, laying on a smooth dirt area where you could tell he hadn't thrashed around or rolled around or any of that. It was pretty sudden, and he laid down and died, it appeared. And so anyway, then I sold I had another hazing horse that I had started, and so after the other horse got well, I went back to hauling my own, and then I had an opportunity. I sold those to a guy in Canada, those horses, and I got in and rodeoed with Bill and Sam Duval for most of 88 and all of 89, and went to a lot of PRCA rodeos and went to some others as well, but mostly to those, and so rodeo with them. And then 1990, Clarence still had the yellow horse that I won my first championship on, and I decided that was I got married in the fall of '88, and so I came back. I guess I'm trying to get my years straight. So yeah, it would have been 1990 then. I got back in with Clarence and rodeoed with him, all of that year, and went with him and went back to the IFR, and then once again, Clarence decided he was going to stay around closer to home, and so my old friend John Bartz back in Minnesota, where I grew up, had a horse that I liked. I had never ridden, but I liked him, liked the looks of him, and I thought he'd fit me. And I went up there at Christmas time to see my folks, and went over and visited with John, and made a deal to buy his horse. And and he sold him to me, and so I bought a truck and trailer again, and away we went, and back on the trail with my own rig, and then pretty much after that, I always had my own when I was rodeoing.
Okay. And who jumped with you, if you can remember? So this would be in the 90s. You in 1990 you were back in with Clarence, and you went to the IFR. So that would have been in 91. That IFR.
January of 91. Yeah, January of 91, which was the first year that the IFR moved to Oklahoma City.
Okay.
In the old, what was the Myriad then? It changed names over the years, but it was the Myriad then, and that's where the NFR had been before it moved to Vegas.
And that was the year that you then, in January of 1991, you won another title. Yes.
No,
that would be a year later. Okay.
1990, even though the finals was in 91, it was the 90 season, and that was Clarence's second championship. So, he won his second one that year, and then the following year is when I kind of got back on a roll and had success for the next 9 years.
I was going to say,
were a good decade.
You had the decade wrapped up. Absolutely. I mean, every single year, beginning in 1991, running through 1999, 9 championships. Incredible. So how did your steer wrestling go back to 91? Take us through those years. How did your steer wrestling evolve from 91 to 99? What changed? What was going on in the world? What was going on with you? I know you got married in 88, so you've got a family now.
Yeah, and so one of the things that, as I look back, and I probably didn't realize it at the time, but even some of the early success I had, I mean, I don't think I got too big-headed or full of myself when I had success, but I didn't have as much experience as a lot of guys steer wrestling, because many of them started, when they were much younger than when I started, so even though I was having some success qualifying for the IFR, I won championships in 85 and 86. I didn't. I don't think I was near at my peak or my prime yet. I was in my early 20s, and so I think a lot of times steer wrestlers, it changes with everybody, but I don't think they necessarily peak if they can avoid serious injury. Mm-hmm. I think late 20s and early 30s and maybe even mid 30s is when a lot of them peak. Mm-hmm. I think I was, as I got closer to 30, I think I was more physically mature and certainly more mentally mature, and I think and had a lot more experience and repetition, and had run a lot of steers and seen lots of different situations, and I think during that time there in the mid, early through all of the 90s, really, I think I was at my peak and my prime. Mm-hmm. The last year that I won it, 1999, mm-hmm. Ronnie Fields was one of my traveling partners, and he was really coming on strong. And About Labor Day weekend, he was ahead of me quite a bit. I say quite a bit, but I mean, he had a lead, and he was really coming into his own, and he had really gotten where he was, I felt like, one of the best out there in any association, and he was really coming into his own. And while I wasn't going to quit trying, I really thought it was his year, and he hurt his knee Labor Day weekend. I mean, he was traveling with me at Jasper, Arkansas, and it put him out for the rest of the year. He had to have knee surgery, and he probably shouldn't have come back in time to compete at the IFR, but he did. Surgery was a success, and he got a good brace, and so he didn't compete from Labor Day weekend till the end of the season.
Oh, wow. Which
is the end of November. So I went to a lot of rodeos that he wasn't able to go to. And I caught him in the standings, and then I ended up staying ahead of him at the IFR and beating him by a little bit. And I remember, and Ronnie and I are still really good friends and have remained friends, and really got close in those years that he was traveling with me. He was one of the first ones to come and congratulate me when it was over, the last round of the IFR. And I remember, telling him that, I thanked him for the congratulations, but that I knew that if he hadn't got hurt, the story would have been different. And, the next year was his year. And then he won 3 in a row the next 3 years and became just a dominant figure in the steer wrestling.
And were you still going, Dale, at that time, 2000 and forward?
Yeah. And so those early 2000s, the first time I didn't make the IFR, I always remember, I forget exactly what year it was, but probably about 2003 or so, the first year that I missed the IFR in a long time. People were trying to be nice, and they would say, gosh, I know you didn't go to as many rodeos as usual, and this and that, and kind of making excuses for me that I didn't make it. And Ronnie Fields and Tudor Silver were two of my traveling partners that went with me, and I said, hey, I appreciate that, but I just didn't perform well enough. I said the two guys that traveled with me and went to the same rodeos are both in the top 5. I mean, I don't have any excuse that I didn't make it. I didn't go to as many rodeos as I had some years, but they certainly did. But they were younger and better than me, and they won. They won more than I did, and so it was nobody's fault but my own. And so yeah, I kept going through those years, and really right up through. Although I didn't go as much. 06, the fall of 06, I was at 20 miles from my house at Claremore, Oklahoma. I was at a rodeo. It was called Roundup for Jesus, and it wasn't a sanctioned event. It was a gentleman named Marty Brock, who been around rodeo a long time and long-time tie-down roper, is also a cowboy preacher, and he once in a while he puts on rodeos, and he calls them Roundup for Jesus, and a local church group or a group of churches will put them on, and no admission, and they invite people to come and watch the rodeo, and then they'll preach a message, at intermission or before or after the rodeo. And so I was at one of those, and I was hazing for somebody on my own horses, and I'd got a different hazing horse not too long before that, and I was hazing a steer, and the hazing horse broke in two and bucked me off and separated my pelvis, and fluke deal. But anyway, that was in the fall of 06, and I still competed the rest of that year, but was having quite a bit of pain. And then I took a little break, and then I hazed for a couple guys at the IFR that year in January of 07, and then some things changed with the IPRA, and I got an opportunity to become the general manager of the IPRA, and pretty much quit competing and focused on the business side of things.
I understand. And a broken pelvis, right? A separated pelvis. What is the treatment for that? And what's it feel like when you step on a horse with a broken pelvis?
Well, and so when it happened, it was the horse bucked, and I wasn't ready. I was looking back, watching the guy catch a steer, and and then the horse broke in two, and so I hit on the horse several times and up on the front of my saddle, and so now I'm just wanting to get off and save my life, and the horse is still bucking. And when I go to try to step off, he kind of swoops back sideways, and I end up landing right in front of him, and he stomps on me pretty good. And so he stepped on the back of my leg right behind my knee, and he stepped on my back and kicked me in the back of the head, and as he went over the top of me. And so at that point, I kind of hurt all over. I was I wasn't sure what hurt the most, but I was hurt. So I got up, and somebody helped me out of the arena, and I sat down, and I was actually more worried about my knee. It hurt the worst, and knee injuries are common for steer wrestlers, and I was worried about it, and it started to swell up, and so I did go to the doctor and get checked, and so they did some X-rays, and I think they did an MRI of my knee, and so they said there wasn't anything broke, and the knee looked like it was just, they said some soft tissue damage on the back of the leg, but nothing with the stability of the joint and the knee itself. And so I thought, well, that's good. So a few weeks later, I was entered at the Prairie Circuit Finals. It was at Guthrie, Oklahoma then. And so I put kind of a brace on it and wrapped it up, and I competed there, and I didn't do very well, and it hurt to ride a horse, but I'd turned black and blue and stuff, and they had X-rayed my hips and stuff, and nothing was broken, but I thought I think I did tear my groin, but there's not a lot to be done for that, and so I thought, well, I'll get through this, and then I'll take a little break and heal up, and so that was in the circuit finals in November, and so then I stayed off a horse until I hazed for a couple of guys at the IFYR in January, and then took another break. And then in about the 1st of March, the last Longhorn rodeo that was at Tulsa, it was I entered it. I'd leased the horse that I had at the time to Tudor Silver, that was one of my former traveling partners when I quit going, and he leased the horse, and he was coming to Tulsa, and it was a good rodeo and close to home. And I thought, well, I'll enter it. And I ran my steer, and of all things, I kind of lost my stirrup when I left the box, which rarely ever happened to me, but it did that day. And so I just squeezed real hard and tried to get off and catch the steer, and I did get off and catch him, but it didn't go well, and it really hurt. And I told my wife, I said, I don't know, I think something's still wrong, because it really hurt when I had to squeeze like that. Yeah. So I go back to the doctor, and so now this time they did an MRI and put like a piece of foam between my legs, and they said, well, you separated your pelvis. How'd you do that? And I said, well, I did it last October. And this is March. Yeah. And so anyway, there wasn't a lot to do for it. They gave me a big belt that went around my hips that kind of held everything together, and told me not to ride a horse for a while, and stuff. So it still gives me a little problem, but not. I mean, I can kind of do whatever I want, and it just took a lot longer to heal then, because I'm not a doctor certainly, but I guess it's just a piece of cartilage that holds your pelvis together in the middle. And so when you tear that loose, it just constantly kind of moves a little bit, and it's hard to get it to heal, because every little movement kind of keeps it from healing. So when I wore that belt for a while and really pulled my hips together and stuff, and didn't ride a horse or try to get spraddled out, eventually I don't ride a horse very much anymore. If I do, when I first get off, it might be a little sore, but it's not doing any damage or anything. And so,
okay. So you would say generally walking about these days, no issue?
yeah, I can, I've got aches and pains like most 60-year-old guys, and especially 60-year-old guys that, rodeoed hard for 25 years, but I really fortunate. I can get around pretty good, and I can kind of do what I want at my own pace. I've taken up golf as a hobby, and so I play a little golf, and that's my getaway and my escape. So.
Okay, so this is my final question. There's two of them. Okay, did you ever compete at St. Tite in the steer wrestling?
Yes, many times.
Okay.
Before I quit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the next time we meet, Dale, we're gonna talk a lot about St. Tite and your involvement and how that rodeo has grown so much. Did you win up there? Was that and the crowds, right? The crowds up there.
Yeah, it's I never won first. I won second there a couple of times, but I never won first. My horses had a lot of success. I can remember one year. They took 12 back to the short go then. I think they only take 8 now, and I had 11 of the 12.
Wow.
I was entered, plus I had – so there was only one guy that didn't ride my horse, so I almost had a cinch to win something on my horse. But when I first went there, it was – I've still not seen anything quite like it, but
right.
The French culture and everything, the announcer being in French and all that, so I have no idea what they're saying.
Right.
I just know whatever it is, they get the people really excited.
They do.
And to see, I think last time I checked with Sylvan and them, for the festival. There's over 600,000 people come through a town of about 3,500, and there's no hotels, and they're camped everywhere.
Absolutely.
And if people have a spare room, they rent it out. And I've been to big events and big rodeos but I've never been to a rodeo that big in that small a town, right?
Yeah,
it just consumes everything, that festival. For 600,000 people or more to come through there in 10 days, and the rodeo only holds 7,500 people. So,
right.
At the most, if nobody goes twice, there's 75,000 people go to the rodeo.
Right.
It's just a fraction of the people.
Yeah.
But it's the main event and the center of attention. And, as you saw, it's one block in the middle of town, and that takes up the rodeo arena. And it's a pretty incredible place.
Okay. And my final question for you, Dale. I know you competed at St. Tite in the steer wrestling. Did you ever compete in St. Tite in golfing? Maybe a tournament or something like that?
Well, so some of the guys up there have taken up golf for recreation too, and Sylvan, the general manager of the rodeo, being one of them, and so we have played together a few times. So this year, on Monday after the first weekend after the Canada Cup, before the next rodeo started, is kind of their off day, and so they organized a little golf tournament up there this year, and so myself and Sylvan and BJ and Dustin Thompson, who's an old bronc rider from Western Canada and now is a stock contractor. We had a team and a 4-man scramble. And so we were the inaugural St. Tite golf scramble champions. And so, that's a pretty memorable thing to hang my hat on.
Absolutely.
I can't throw a steer down anymore. So.
Absolutely. No, I'm excited for you. No one can only one person or only one team can win the very first ever. So congratulations on that win. Well, Dale,
I'm sure that will go down in the history books for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Dale, this has been a real pleasure for me. And I really appreciate you taking the time. Next time we get together, there's so much more we got to cover. And I'd love to have you back in the near future so we can get on with everything else we need to get to. How about that?
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
All right. All right. We hope that you enjoy our podcast as much as we enjoy doing it. If you do, please share it with your friends. Help us spread the word. Please, please, please share it on Facebook. To make your listening easier, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Search for Beyond the Chutes and follow us. Remember, check out the New York State Rodeo Museum Facebook group page and become a member. And we'd like to say thank you to ParaSight Systems for their support with our podcast. ParaSight System is a push-button parasitic diagnostic system for pasture animals, your horses, cattle, goats, sheep, chickens, and for your companion animals, your dogs and your cats. You can find them at ParaSightSystems.com. They now offer testing in Canada, and we've got a coupon for 50% off your testing. You need simply to go on to ParaSightSystems.com, and when you purchase your specimen bags, your specimen kits, you can enter the code BTC023 and get 50% off. And this is Beyond the Chutes with Dale Yerigan. Until next time, this is Doug Simcox. Thank you for listening.